Recently, when U.S. President Donald Trump imposed and then suspended tariffs on all Canadian products, it got many there thinking, with friends like that, who needs enemies? Well, Canada's leaders are apparently rethinking their ties to the United States. They're turning to another partner, also targeted by Trump's tariffs, an ally on the other side of the Atlantic, the European Union. Canada's largest daily newspaper, the Toronto Star, has posed a question that not too long ago would have seemed fanciful. It ran with the headline, "Donald Trump drives a wedge between Canada and the U.S. with a trade war. Could we join the EU?" And it's not only the Toronto Star. The Economist has been pondering why Canada should join the EU. Europe needs space and resources. Canada needs people. Let's deal.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode. Today I want to talk about a hypothetical situation where Canada gets fed up with the United States and its tariffs and its threats of economic war and decide to join the European Union. Yeehaw! I could come up with a bunch of different reasons. I did quite a bit of research on it earlier this morning, and I think I've made a case for the Prime Minister to consider talking with the EU. First of all, access to a single market in regards to an economy. Membership with the EU would provide more of a seamless economic situation between Europe and the Canadian country. Canada would have far more diplomatic ties with the EU. It's one of their biggest trading partners. Economically, joining such a large market as the EU would put them in a much better place for trade and negotiations and development. It would obviously take their currency to a much stronger part if, in that negotiation, they decided to go to the euro and scrap the Canadian dollar. As of about 5 minutes ago, I checked on the exchange rates, and the Canadian dollar is worth about 3/4 of an American dollar, just a little over 70%. And the euro against the dollar, the euro is worth 1.1 US dollars. So the US dollar is worth less than the euro. So if the Canadians were to all of a sudden switch over to the euro, which would take some time, it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. We saw what happened with the British country and how the UK didn't deal well with it, but I think Canada could probably deal better with it. They're a much more, shall we say, stable, friendly, thoughtful kind of an environment. Thinking about foreign investment, Canada were part of the EU. They would have foreign investment that would not have a lot of problems in regards to tariffs, trades, legal problems, diplomacy, whatnot. They would actually be in the Union. Now, the time I spent in Europe, all of the countries, the 27 countries that are already part of it, you freely trade back and forth. They freely travel back and forth. It's very much like the United States. It's just that it's the European United States. So foreign investment would be easier for other companies to make an investment in or trade with Canada. Again, I'm not seeing the downside of it here. Let's look at it from the political point of view. Canada stands sovereign and alone and strong at our northern border. If they were to join the EU, they would be standing not alone anymore. They would be standing with 27 other countries, which does include NATO also. Trade policies, global security, opportunity for exchange, all come with that. And the global voice that they would have is not just Canada standing alone, it's the economic union speaking. Tariffs, it'd be kind of tough. I mean, there was a clip I did this morning when I was doing some digging, and I'll put the screenshot right in here someplace of the amount of aluminum that we get out of Canada. If Canada were to become a part of the EU, there's a possibility that aluminum is going to cost us a lot more to get because now they're trading on the euro. Canada already has strong ties with the EU. They've got an agreement out there, and I'll get around to talking about that in just a minute. But if they started sharing basic democratic values and policies and economics, well, that'd only make them all the more stronger. They're not going to be sovereign and alone against the size of the United States versus the size of Canada. I mean, if they're short on population, it's only because their territories are undisturbed, shall we say, and they have the uranium, the aluminum, the timber, the water generating hydropower, the wildlife, the fish, the cattle grazing grounds, the beef, and the farming that goes on up there. It's what they lack in population size, they make up for in natural resources. So it would be a two-way street for the EU to be able to see all that and for the EU to have access to some of this. And hey, it wouldn't hurt if all of a sudden the boundaries between the EU and Canada were dissolved so that people could live in Canada. Basically, they wouldn't even need a passport. They just come over and set up home and call it a day. Canada could actually grow their population out of that whole thing. I think it's a win-win. Looking at labor and education, Canadians would be free to live and work and study across 27 other countries without a visa restriction. If they're part of the EU, they travel just like we do in the States. If I'm living here in New York State and I want to send my kid to Ohio for an education, I don't have to get a special visa. I don't have to apply for anything special. You just apply to the college, and if you get accepted, you go. Canadian students would also have access to the lower tuition rates of Europe. A lot of the countries over there believe in a freer education, but the Canadians would have that same ability. Canadian kids who want to go on for a college education and want to get out of the country to go see another part of the world, it would be an absolutely wonderful experience for them all. It's not much different than any other foreign exchange program. Let's go on to security and defense. And by the way, Canada, if you have got any ideas on this, don't be afraid to put some notes down in there. You know I talk to all of you. Security and defense. While Canada is already in the NATO organization, and the EU membership could offer more security through cooperation in areas like, I want to look at this, cybersecurity and cyber terrorism. What Canada may not have in their hands right now, they would have joining the EU. Imagine the resources that the EU collectively have put together that Canada may not have developed yet, that they would have access to. Absolutely wonderful for them. Imagine people coming in from the EU and consulting with the Canadians on building a better area in that regards. Now, this is a hypothetical. It's not as easy as it may sound. There's a lot of intricacy. There's a lot of political aspects. There's a lot of economic aspects. There's sovereignty. So one of the things about the EU was that they normally wanted anybody that joined them to be in Europe. That's why it's called the EU. Typically, it's reserved for just European countries, but what's the definition of a European country? Basically, the United States and Canada are all from Europe. We traveled from that continent to this continent to develop it. So maybe there's an in there. There's the sovereignty concerns. Canada is a very proud country, and rightfully so. Okay? It may require some loss of national sovereignty. I don't know. I like I say, when I'm in France and I'm in the Netherlands, they seem to be very sovereign to themselves. I don't see any loss in their heritage, any loss in their leadership. So I doubt that there'd be much loss for Canada. Canada's a very proud country and would bring a lot to the table for the EU. Now, the toughest part would be the economics, adjusting to the euro from the Canadian dollar. That might take some back and forth. I'm not sure what the implications are of all that, what it would do to their banking systems and what it would do to their costs of living. If they're used to working on a dollar right now that's only worth 70 cents American and just a little less than that in the EU, what's the exchange rate to get started? That's all just questions. But I'm not seeing the dark side of this. I'm not seeing the bad side of it. What's the saying? Okay, so what's the downside of all this? I'm not seeing a lot. If there's a downside, it's small, it's recoverable. If I were asked my opinion, if a Canadian asked me my opinion, it's like, what are you waiting for? Our president isn't doing anything to help you. He's threatening you. He's threatening your economic situation. He's threatening your sovereignty, which I think is a complete insult from him. Please don't think that the rest of us down here think the same way, Now, I mentioned that Canada already has a trade agreement. There's a comprehensive economic and trade agreement, the CETA, that Canada already has with the European Union. And that may be affected. It may be enhanced. I don't know. Maybe that's something worth doing a deeper dive on for another episode here. But Canada, let me know what you think. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of Americans down here that would root for you. Americans, dive in, please. It's right there. Put a comment in there. But from what I've heard from my Canadian friends, and they're loyal and they are good people, I don't see the downside. You might want to look into that. You might want to talk to your provincial ministers, and you might want to talk to your prime minister about it. I think you might have something there. But anyways, I digress. That's just an American's point of view on what Canada should do to fight back against our president. Anyways, folks, thank you for being here. My Canadian visitors, all the people from around the world, all the people, 73 cities was the last count. I haven't checked it in a while, but that was the last count. 173 cities spread out completely around the globe. Thank you. I do appreciate your loyalty and your being willing to listen to one man's rant from a corner in the United States. Folks, with that, I'm going to thank you for being here and wish you well. Have a wonderful evening.